This video is a part of a free chapter from my new course, The Blendinator. Click the links in the description to learn more. In this chapter, I'm going to introduce you to a concept called projection mapping. Now, it's also called camera mapping or perspective matching. There's a few different terms for it, but it's all about projecting images from the 3D camera. And we're going to do this with the help of a very popular free and open source program called fSpy. Now, if you've done projection mapping or any world building in the past, chances are you've probably come across this program. But it is a great way to start building out a 3D world according to pictures because it places the camera exactly where it was when the picture was shot. Same position, angle, focal length, all that stuff, which is almost impossible to do in Blender by yourself, just by eye. It can be done, but fSpy makes it so much easier. But anyway, this is the result that we're going for. So I don't know if you've heard of the game Exploding Kittens, but it is an amazing game. I highly recommend it. They are not paying me to promote this. I just really like the game. And it makes for a fun little demonstration here for projection mapping. But you can see I have my camera pointed directly at that, and it's projecting this image down onto just a regular box here that I modeled. So if I move the camera, you can see the picture is moving with it. Or if I move the geometry, you can see the picture doesn't actually stick onto the geometry, just projecting from here. If I go into the camera mode, you can see this is the image that we're using to project. If I just click out to deselect, there you go. So this is just a picture that I took with my phone. And so this is a good way that you can do photogrammetry type stuff without actual photogrammetry software. Now, because you don't have the photogrammetry software to do the heavy lifting for the modeling, you do have to have some experience with modeling. And speaking of, let's go over a little bit of that now. Now, I know you probably know this already, but I'm going to go over it as a refresher, and it will also help when we go into fSpy. In the 3D world, 3D stands for 3 dimensions, which means that there are 3 axes upon which objects can move in 3D space. So here are axes. If I click Z, I will enable the Z axis as well. So we can either move up and down, which is on the Z axis, which is represented by this blue line, left and right, which is represented by the X axis, or front and back, which is the green axis. Now the green and red axis, the X and Y, represent the ground plane. So technically I could use the X axis to go back and forth and the Y axis to go left and right. That is completely up to you. I usually like to think about the green axis as front and back because if I press 1 on the numpad, this is looking at the front. It says this is front orthographic. So I generally refer to the green as front and back and then the X as left and right. Now what's important about this is when we model stuff using an fSpy modified image, we are restricted to just that camera position to model from. So we can't necessarily come around and model rotating around like this on all sides. We can, but we won't see our image. So just like here, this is the image projected. But before we project onto that, we're going to be in wireframe. And you can't see anything here, so we only see stuff through the camera. So we have to model straight from the camera. So the best way to do this is to do our axis locking, which we've talked about before. So axis locking, if I press G to grab and then Y to constrain it on the Y, or X on the X, or Z on the Z. We can also exclude axes, meaning if I just want to move it up and down and front and back, but not left and right, then I press G and then Shift X. I've excluded the X axis. I'm just moving it back and forth and up and down. I can't go back here, and even though it looks like maybe I've moved it back and now it's also been scaled up, if I start to rotate, you can see, oh, no, it hasn't. I haven't moved it on the X at all. So something that's useful here is if I press G and then Shift Z, now it will exclude the Z axis, which means I can't move it up and down. So I will only be moving it on the X and Y, which is just the floor plane, which is actually super useful when we're working with just one camera angle. But we will mostly be doing this in edit mode. So if we're in edit mode and then wireframe, if you don't have the X-ray turned on, you would just see something like this, and then you can select the faces. But With X-ray mode on, you see these little dots, and you have to be closer to the dots in order to select them. And you can see I can select through the mesh to the back face there. So if I wanted to move the back face back on the X, I can press G and then X to move that back, and GY like this. Of course, we want to be in camera mode here so we can see our image. And so this is what it looks like. So GY and move that in, and then select GX. So this is what we will be doing. One last quick tip here is that if I grab a face, or it could be an edge or it could be a point, it doesn't matter. But if I press G and start moving it, if I just tap the middle mouse down, I don't have to hold it, just tap it, it will move it along the axis that my mouse wants to go in. Now Blender will try its best to understand which direction you're going, and if it's the wrong one, then you can just tap the middle mouse button again while you move it along the axis that you want. So there you can see it switches, and if I go up, I can switch it up. So I can switch it just by tapping the middle mouse button. Okay, so having said all that, let's actually go get fSpy so that we can use it to adjust our Blender camera. So head on over to fSpy.io. It's free and open source. You don't have to pay anything for it. But if you want to donate, I highly recommend doing that because this is a super awesome program. But you can download it for Mac, Windows, or Linux, which is nice. And if you download it, just download the one you need over here. And then for Blender, you will also need the fSpy importer add-on, which you can click here. And then it will take you over to the GitHub page, which you can read more about it here and how to install it. But just click this for the latest and then download the zip file. You can follow the instructions there to download the plugin, but we also have some tutorials here. So we got the basics and tutorial. I'm not going to go over all of this on this page. This is what this video is about, so I will be talking about all of this. But I do want to mention the limitations. So fSpy only works with perspective images resulting from some pinhole camera-like process. So things like photos taken with regular near distortion-free lenses or 3D images rendered with a perspective camera. What will not work with fSpy are photos taken with lenses like severe distortions, fisheye lenses, equal rectangular images, things like that, or where this perspective has been tampered with. So some cameras have perspective control built in, so it won't work with that. And then 3D images rendered with an orthographic camera. Orthographic just means no perspective at all, so all parallel lines. And we'll go into more of the vanishing points and parallel lines and all of that stuff in another video. But the last one here is stitched panorama images. And I wish I had known this a long time ago because I was trying to use it with my stitched images that we talked about in the first environment chapter. And it didn't work out so well. The vanishing points don't all match. Just know that generally speaking, panorama images will not work with fSpy. And then you can look at the tutorial over here. But like I said, that is the purpose of this video. So go ahead and launch fSpy and you will see something that looks like this. And for this demo, we are going to use our first image here, 01. So I'm just going to click and drag that here. And now we see our image, but it's looking a little dark, so all we have to do is uncheck dim image. Now for those of you who aren't familiar with fSpy, just a quick rundown over here on the left panel here, these are all the options that we can tweak and change, along with the handles and the lines here that will line up to our image in just a moment. And then over here on the right panel is the output. So we've got our camera position, our camera orientation. This is all the calculations from this that it spits out into here, and this is what will be imported into Blender. So I'm not going to change anything yet. I'm going to use all of the defaults, and we already know our ground plane is the X and the Y, so that's the same thing. So the X is red, the Y is green, and I think I want it to face forward, which means that the left and right, or the X-axis, is going to go along the length of the box. So I'm going to start dragging this on to the length. Now we can also hold down Shift and drag, and that slows it down. And it also gives us this zoom bubble so that we can see. That's the only way we can zoom in, by the way. We can't scroll into the image or move the image at all, which is a little annoying, but it's really just a small pain point. And let's just put this here like that. So you can see this line here, and then we have an extension of that going off into the distance. That is going to be what determines the vanishing point. Now we won't be able to see our vanishing points, but we'll see the trajectory of where it goes. And a good rule of thumb on this is to drag these lines at opposite ends of the image or the object that you're trying to recreate. And that's because the closer they are, the harder it is to determine perspective, because they're sort of just parallel. So the further away they are across the image, then the more perspective they have. And then now you can see that this line is going up. They will eventually converge over here. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Let's drag this down here. And this one here, this will be the Y. I can extend this here too if I wanted to. Sometimes it's easier to see that way. And then this one here, like that. Okay, and as I've been doing that, you've probably noticed that this little thing has been moving around. It's just been calibrating. So this is our world origin. And wherever we place this, that's where the world origin is going to end up when we import this into Blender. So we want to figure out where to put this. Now, I've got lucky here. This looks right with the Z-axis going up on the positive Z, the Y-axis going on the positive Y, and the X on the positive X. Now again, you probably know this, but just in case, going back to Blender, I'm going to press 7 on the numpad to go into top mode. And now you can see that we are looking down the Z-axis. I can also press this here. So if I'm out here, I can just click Z, and this will go into top mode. And I'm looking downwards on the Z-axis. So this is the ground floor. And if I go up this way on the Y-axis, this is positive Y, just like a regular graph. And then from the origin going to the right, this is positive X. Again, just like the graph. And of course, that would mean this is negative X and this is negative Y. Same thing with the Z. Going up is positive Z, going down is negative Z. So that's important to watch for when you're looking at your little origin point here, because if you accidentally have something like this, then you're going to need to change your orientation of things. Otherwise, the camera is going to be upside down, because that's the positive Z going this way, and this is the positive X going this way. Now, the only way to flip this is by changing either 1 or 2 here. That's the only way. And you can obviously see that this is negative X, which we need to change to positive. But that's not always going to correspond like this. Depending on how you line up your lines, this could be going negative like this, and the Z could be going negative, but you could see a positive X and a positive Y here. That doesn't matter at all. Just if something is off here, just switch the one that's off. If it's negative, then choose positive. If it's positive, then choose negative. It doesn't have to actually correspond to what you see here. So in this case, it does. I know that I need to change the X-axis because the X-axis is going in the negative direction. So we're going to just change that to positive, and then that should flip everything the way it should. So this is positive Y, positive X, positive Z. And with that said, we can place this wherever we want. I'm going to place it right here, which makes the most sense. And we can also hold our Shift key down. Good, and we are almost done. The last thing I want to do, which is optional, depending on what your units you're using in Blender, such as metric, imperial, or whatever, you got to be careful. But if you're just using a single image like this example, then it's pretty easy to set some measurements. So we come over to reference distance and change default. I'm going to say along the Y-axis. I know that the width of this is 2 inches. So I'm going to say 2 here, and you have to press enter. You can't press tab, just keep that in mind. And then we change this to inches. And then we have these sliders here, which is a little bit hard to see because we have all of this going on here. And you know what I'm going to do instead? I'm going to bring this up here, even though it's not entirely on the opposite side. It's far enough away from this to it won't make a difference. And then what I'm going to do is, since this edge, or really any edges in the real world, don't actually have a hard edge, I got to line it up some other way. So kind of like where the shadow is. So like this dark line where the shadow and the light meet. That's kind of how I try to line it up. Just anything that looks like it represents a straight line. There we go. So now we can actually see our measuring tool here, and we can take these and slide them, and we can also press Shift. So here's one end, and then we take the other end and we pull this over here. So that should be 2 inches. And if we move this here, you can see if I move these handles, the calculation of the camera position changes over here as I'm moving it. And that's the case with any of these here. So if I'm moving this, you can see all these numbers just start going crazy because it's just, that's what this is doing. This is calculating the position of the 3D camera. That's good enough for now. We can always come back and tweak it, which we will. So let's go ahead and save this. I like to save all my fSpy files in an fSpy folder. So we're just going to say 01, enter. Now let's open up a new instance of Blender, select everything X to delete. And now we have to install the add-on that we downloaded. So go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and then we click Install. And then just navigate to wherever you downloaded it. Just double click or click Install Add-on. And then when it's done, make sure to enable that by the check mark here. And then you can save your preferences here. And now we're ready to import. So let's go to File, Import, and we should see a new option called fSpy at the very bottom. Navigate to our fSpy folder, and then notice over here, if you don't see this, just press N on the keyboard. We have update existing import, if any, so that allows us to update it if it's the same name, which we'll keep that. And then import background image, we want to keep that as well. So we can click import, and ta-da, here's what we have. And the image is a little dim here as well, so let's pull this out and go to our camera background images and just pull the opacity all the way up. And you can see the world origin is right in this corner, just like we put it. And so what we can do now is we can add in a plane, and then we can start to scale that down. But let's go into wireframe and then edit mode, and then I can just start doing what we did in the beginning. We can select geometry like this edge here, and G and then X to move it on the X, and this one, G and then Y. Or if you remember, we can G and then tap our middle mouse button. And I like this because I can actually zoom in here now. So we can take that, G, grab, and middle mouse. Okay, and then we can go to face select mode, select this face, E to extrude, and look at that. It's not perfect, but it's getting close. It's starting to line up with our image. But this is the start of building out our world. And of course, if we come back out into the 3D space here, we don't see anything yet. And even if we go to material, we haven't added a material yet, so we'll do that in just a little bit. But first, let's fix this here. So you can see this isn't lining up going up and down. That's the main problem, I think. So let's go back into fSpy. And what we can do is use this 3D guide. So we've got several options here. If we click this box, we can take this. Let's for now turn off the reference distance because we're going to be accidentally selecting those handles and I don't want to. So now we can just take this and we can start to line up the box like the corners down here or up here with the one in our image. And you can see how this is already, if we had done this before, we would notice that this is off over here. So this is very helpful for us. We just check on all these things. So I'm just checking down here in this corner and then moving it and checking up here in this corner. And then once I place it there, we just watch it all the way down. And yeah, so that's definitely not lining up. We also can do a grid floor going front and back like this. That also gives us an indication that this is not calibrated correctly. And then we can do left and right, same thing. And you can start to see, it's good to check on all sides of your object, or if there are more objects in your image, it's good to check on the extreme opposite ends of the image. And then we also have the grid floor, which in this case probably wouldn't help us because it looks like that is lined up pretty nicely. So we don't really have to change that, or, well, we kind of do, but I'll show you that here. So let's place this back, or actually let's get a box because I liked the visual on that a little bit better. And I'm going to place it here in this corner down here, and we're going to just watch this line here. So all we need to do is take some of these and just move them. And I don't know which ones we can just kind of see by clicking and dragging. And with any ones that we do, it's going to manipulate. So we just got to see where we might be off here somewhere. So I'm just going to drag this in a little bit more, maybe drag this in, because sometimes the corners are a little bit off. So just kind of drag them in, because sometimes the corners are like, smushed or whatever. So you might not actually be lining it up straight. So just kind of bring those in like that. And that doesn't look like that's helping all that much. Just not doing it very well. It looks maybe it's this one. Maybe that's the one that's okay. There we go. I'm just really ever so slightly moving that while watching this. That looks like it's a little bit more parallel to the edge there, but I want to make sure I'm not also moving it too far away from going back and forth. So let's grab one of these grid axes. Let's do this one here first. Let's see what that looks like. You can see actually this line lines up perfectly with that, as well as this one over here. So I think we're good to go here. Just looking at on this side again, on the opposite sides. That's good enough. I like that. So I'm going to turn this off. And the guide you can keep on or turn off. For visual sake, I like to turn that off. So line that back up. And don't forget to turn our reference back on, because if we don't, then it's going to be default and it's going to change everything. So let's make sure these are lined up where they should be still. Okay, let's save it. And we could just save it. If we save as and rename it, it's just going to import a second camera, which we don't want. So let's just save over what we have already. And then back in Blender, we can just come and import again. And as long as we have this update existing import checked, it's going to update it. So just import it and ta-da, it's updated it. But of course, we have to tweak our geometry again to line it up a little bit better. So let's take the top. I'm going to take the top and move it up first. Yeah, see that's lining up really nicely already. And then the back one here, back like that. Oh, and then maybe the back face comes in just ever so slightly. And we kind of got it cut off over here, but that's okay. Let's see on this one. Yeah, I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of slightly in, because you can kind of see this is kind of hanging off there, and maybe you'll pull this one back too, so that we don't see a lot of that carpet on the edge, which we can a little bit. It's not a big issue. Perfect. Now I haven't saved this, so it's probably a good idea to save. Okay, so now let's project this onto our image. First thing I'm going to do is select the camera. We've got to be in object mode, of course, first. Select the camera, and then come down to the properties, viewport display, and I'm just going to take that size and pull that down. This doesn't have anything to do with what we see in the camera. It's just the wireframe display here, so it's not encroaching over our object. Maybe bring it down to 3. There we go. Okay, and then you can see as I'm middle mouse to rotate, now my view is skewed, and that's because if I go into camera mode and then middle mouse to rotate out of that, it just skews your perspective. So all you have to do is either press 1 or 3 or 7 on the numpad, or just click one of these, and then it will straighten everything out for you, and then you can come back in here and it should be straight. Okay, let's go to material preview mode here. We don't have a material yet, so let's select our object, go to materials, and then I'm going to choose this material. If you don't have one, just create a new one. I'm going to change principled to emission. The color I'm going to change to an image texture, and then we're just going to choose our O1 fSpy image. Ta-da! Well, that doesn't seem to be working at all. So I'm going to show you the easiest, most straightforward way to project your image onto the geometry that you just lined up, and that is by using a UV project modifier. But before that, we need to make sure that we have a UV map. It doesn't matter what it is or what it's called, we just need to have one. And usually when we add objects, they come with one by default. So that's good. And then we go to our modifiers, go to add modifier, and then UV project. We can select that UV map, and then we need to punch in the dimensions for the aspect ratio of our image. So that's 1920 by 1080 for this one. And then we just need to select our camera, which is O1 fSpy. Boom. And now we have it being projected onto our object, which is pretty cool. However, you can notice that there is quite a bit of warping, and that's because the UV project modifier needs geometry to work well. But this is pretty easy. All we need to do is add a subdivision surface modifier, make this simple, and then make a couple more levels of subdivision. And as you can see, as we do that, it starts to straighten out everything. And going beyond 3, you can watch it. It usually is between 3 and 5 work well, but you don't want to do too much. Actually, 6 is the most that a subdivision surface modifier can go. After that, you'll just need to duplicate it, but be careful because the more subdivisions, the more Blender is going to calculate and you could crash it. So just be careful. But as you can see, between 3 and 4, you can't really see any different. So I'm going to keep this at 3 for both of these. And I'm going to check these just in case. I like to have all those checked. Now it hasn't completely straightened it out. And this is because of the order of operations. And this is super important. And I will explain this in more detail in another video. But for now, just know that we need to drag the subdivision above the UV project modifier. And there we go. Now it's straightened everything out. So now it's calculating this one first as an order of operations, and then this one second. Again, super important. We'll get into that later. But now you can see, look at that. We have an awesome looking 3D Exploding Kittens game box. Now you can see on the back, it's all warped and stuff, and that's just because the projection projects through the geometry and onto the other faces. So this corner up here is being projected right here in the middle of this face. And we'll get into that in another video as well. But for now, you can see we can adjust right here with where it meets the carpet just by coming to our camera. We have to make sure our overlays are on. And then in edit mode, we can just tweak these. You know what I can do also is come up here to see things a little bit better. I can uncheck faces, and that way the faces aren't highlighted, only the edges are. And this actually really helps when we select stuff and move stuff to line things up. So I'm going to push that in a little bit there. And in doing so, I might need to change other geometry as well, but well, that's not too bad. This one isn't lining up perfectly, but I'm not going to change it because this is just a demo and this is also still really close. But if you need to, come back over here, adjust these, and then re-save it, and then re-import it. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so we've gotten rid of the carpet there, and that's actually looking pretty good. Of course, we don't have any lighting on this. This is just an emission texture. It's all the same lighting from my room. But that doesn't matter because if we were standing next to an exploding kittens thing with our skull or with anything reflective or metallic, then we would be able to see it here reflecting off of the image. And that's what we're using it for in this course anyway, just for lighting and reflections. But as you saw at the beginning of the video, the picture isn't actually sticking onto our object. It's all dependent on the position of the camera and projecting it from there. So you can see it's very loose. And we could move both of them together like this, which would be fine, but we don't want to do that. We want to actually stick it to the faces of our geometry so we can make our own little asset here. And that is what we'll talk about in the next video, so when you're ready, head on over there.